Guys, how's the form? Welcome to episode 8 of The Ditch in collaboration with Red Wolf. I'm here with one of the Senior Hurlers, my colleague Roman Shorthall. It is on May Day, so happy Workers' Day, Roman. Victory to the workers. It's been a great week for all Donegal people. We march on. Ulster final, here we come against Armagh. Took care of business against Tyrone in Celtic Park at the weekend, so I'm a happy man. We're going to be talking about scenes in Newtownmountkennedy in Wicklow. We're going to be talking about scenes over in Mount Street in Dublin where an encampment has been moved and immigrants have been moved back to Crooksling, which is where government had done similar in the past few months or so. So we're seeing those scenes repeated now. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about some developments over in Temple Street. We covered a story about the use of non-medical grade springs over in Temple Street. The CEO of Temple Street, Alish Irman, just resigned from her position over the weekend. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and our most recent story on Temple Street. But first off, the question I'm going to ask you, Roman, and it's about Mount Street, where, as you were saying earlier, we haven't seen any video of what's been happening on Mount Street today. We've seen some pictures of taxis pulling up where there were international protection applicants who had arrived in Ireland and weren't given accommodation and were given tents, and have seen in the past, videos and pictures of, some people call it an encampment, others have called it a shanty town. Government have effectively gone in, and the Irish Independent used the word that they were clearing it out, which I think was, personally, it wouldn't be the language I'd use myself, but this seems to be state policy now, where they have moved these international protection applicants to another site, which will effectively be another encampment. The very open-ended question, the very basic question, how did we get here?
Yeah, it's hard to know where to start. I suppose, it's been kind of simmering for a couple of years, and this issue, and not just, the issue at Mount Street, but just in general, the issue of there not being enough accommodation for asylum seekers. And obviously the situation has gotten a lot worse since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. We've had this big influx of Ukrainian refugees into Ireland, and tens of thousands, I think, and that combined with, I think, a higher level of asylum seekers from other countries has basically put the government under pressure in terms of trying to find accommodation. But I think, there is this ideological block. We've tens of thousands of vacant properties in the country that nobody seems to want to do anything about. They're happy.
Vacant properties that are increasing in value,
yes,
as they lie dormant.
Yeah,
but we can't talk about them.
We can't talk about them, yeah. And they're it's quite clear that, the government's ideological position is that they're not going to do anything to free up those properties, and instead we have people sleeping in tents on the streets, not just on Mount Street, and not just asylum seekers. People from across the country, Irish, non-Irish, are affected by similar conditions, and it's created this tension between communities like in Newtownmountkennedy and the state. And I think we've seen the kind of worst of that when there was basically riots a couple of days ago in Newtownmountkennedy.
I saw some of the footage of there was some drone footage of one of the protests there. This was, I think, it was last Thursday. There were quite, depending on what kind of language you want to use, there were violent scenes at one of these demonstrations that locals are opposing the use of Trotter House. It's a HSE property, isn't it? That used to be an industrial school.
Yep.
And locals are opposing its use for international protection applicants. And there were, to use the New York Times language on it, there were clashes between protesters and the guards there. And, scenes of high tension, I was talking to one of the boys over the weekend there, and I was very much at pains to say, look, I'm not trying to say that I'm some kind of great activist or anything, or that I've, done so much as far as different campaigns would have gone, but off the top of my head, over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, I've marched for abortion rights, for gay marriage, for Palestine, housing issues, anti-water charges as well. I think a lot of people our age and who share our politics would have a similar experience where, showing up for all these different diverse marches and protests and stuff in places like Newtownmountkennedy. Oftentimes I think it would be a lot of these people's, their first engagement with whatever you want to call it, street politics or protests or activism. Why do you think that is? What draws people to be politicized by something like the use of that Trotter House down in Newtownmountkennedy?
It's kind of, I have to say, it's becoming, I think, increasingly kind of difficult to dissect the politics behind it and what exactly is, spurring people on, to, engage in these demonstrations. And, the first thing I think to say, is that they have a right to protest. They do, if they want to protest, they can protest. That is their right. But it's hard to kind of get to grips with why this particular issue it upsets people so much who maybe wouldn't otherwise engage in any form of kind of protest about other issues. I think for a lot of people kind of looking from the outside in would say that it's just blatant racism, we don't like black people or we don't like brown people, do you know what I mean? And I think it is as simple as that for a lot of people. I think there are other people that are, maybe under the influence of, I would say, conspiracy theories, about the World Economic Forum and, things. I love a good conspiracy theory myself, but it is kind of, it's strange, to hear people that don't appear to be engaged politically with other political issues, but then talking about, the World Economic Forum, WEF, conspiracy theory to plant people in their communities and things like that. And then I think there are other people who, maybe part of it is that they do have issues with resources, but their anger, I think, should be focused towards the government who, are cutting these resources or don't provide these resources. I know Newtownmountkennedy, it's not a million miles away from where I live, and I would be up there passing through it fairly regularly. There's not really much in the way of facilities. That is true. So when you hear people talking about there not being facilities, there aren't any facilities. And sometimes it seems like a kind of a bit of a gloomy place. There's not very much happening there.
There's one of the things that you touched on there about the plantation, which is certainly some of the some of the people who would be involved in these protests, whatever you want to call them, you know, agitators or the like, this idea about about how Ireland's being planted, you know, and this forms at least part of the kind of ideological impetus for a lot of these people. It's kind of, I do think, to be clear, like that this whole thing, the Great Plantation thing, it's kind of like the Irish version of the Great Replacement theory, which is, look, and I know, as we always talk about, like a lot of the people who can be involved in these marches and activist groups, they're very sensitive about the terminology that people use to describe their politics. Like they hate being called far right, you know. And to be clear, I'm kind of ambivalent about the term far right, and I think that, like, yeah, sure, if you have a big march like you have in Newtownmountkennedy, yeah, fine. Not everyone there is going to be far right, but there certainly were far right people there, or, you know, whatever you want to call them, further right or reactionaries or ethno-nationalists, like, you know. And I do think actually when your politics kind of veers into ethno-nationalism, that's when you're going to have to just suck it up and accept the fact that you're going to be called far right. But one of the organisers, your man Haig, who's a former British soldier, you know, and he's been interviewed by some media about his role in the protests. He's one of the organisers, and Owen Dalton in the Journal had a piece about it where he was interviewing him asking him about the politics of the protest. And this guy Haig, apart from anything else, one of the stupidest fucking things I've ever heard, where he said that he wants to keep politics out of the protest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could be accused of maybe being, you know, too fair to the protest march in Newtownmountkennedy at the weekend, right? But, you know, at the front of the march, there was somebody holding a big banner saying, you know, we will not be replaced, which is directly from the playbook of, do you know those guys, the white nationalists in Charlottesville with, yeah, like those like tiki torches and, like, you know, chanting that we will not be replaced. In fact, I think they were saying Jews will not replace us, because that's certainly in a global sense, a lot of these protests are also driven, you know, a lot by kind of actual anti-Semitism, you know. And then, so there certainly are pockets within this movement who have become politicized, who are driven by, you know, absolute far-right conspiracy theorist politics, you know. But then others who are then involved, then they can get quite sensitive about not being tarred with the same brush. But then, do you think that, is there a defence for people because the Journal did put it to this guy, Ken Haig, about the politics of the march, and they said, look, there was someone marching at the front with a, you know, we will not be replaced banner, you know. And your man didn't want to kind of take ownership of that. But do you think there is an out for people who take part in these marches, that they can disown part of the politics of the march? Or do you think that you have to own that?
Well, I think there are different kind of, there are different strands, like, there are different groups at the marches. Like, I mean, I think we've seen in the past where, I'm trying to remember where it was, but like where there would be kind of some people, you know, citizen journalists or otherwise, going into a particular area where there are protests, weren't welcome. And maybe there are people within the protest movement that feel that their concerns are maybe different to someone who thinks they're being replaced as part of a WEF conspiracy, you know. I think that, like, I definitely do think there's a difference between that and someone, you know, who, whether you agree with them or not, like, articulates, you know, a kind of a position of, you know, there aren't enough resources in the community, or, you know, I have safety concerns or things like that. I think it would be unfair to kind of say like that the two things are the same. It's kind of like it is hard to separate all of the things. Maybe it's because, you know, the people saying we're going to be replaced are, you know, a bit more vocal or louder than people who maybe have different issues, you know. I think like the best example would be where you have people, and you can see it on Twitter now, who are basically having a go at Aintu and saying like, you know, fuck Aintu, like,
because they have people of colour running for them. Like, and this is again like where, you know, Aintu announced, I think they have a local election candidate who is a person of colour. And when this was announced on Twitter, all these headbangers who supposedly aren't far right, but then they absolutely lose the run of themselves, going like, oh, Aintu can't be trusted, look at this, like, and you're kind of going, all right, you're going to have to own the fact you are far right if you're going to get up on your high horse about a black or brown person running for Aintu, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is a good way of filtering out people who, I would say, the way I would look at it is that there are people that have genuine concerns, but their anger is directed at the wrong people. They're directing their anger about resources and things at asylum seekers, when in reality, the asylum seekers are going to get the same shit services that they get in their communities. Do you know what I mean? And I think like Aintu would have kind of been hoovering up a lot of support, I think, from those protests. But now it's like, oh, well, like Aintu aren't extreme enough for me. Like, and, you know, I think it's, you're kind of getting into dangerous territory now where like you could look at Aintu and Pater Tobin and say, right, I don't agree with what you're saying, but, you know, there's obviously a market or an electorate or part of the electorate that does. And, you know, people like Pater Tobin would advocate and articulate their reasons for, you know, wanting to kind of limit immigration into Ireland, but aren't encouraging people to set fucking buildings on fire. Do you know what I mean? So I think now we're at the stage where we're going past kind of, you know, Aintu, and now it's going to be an even more extreme version of those views. And I think ultimately it's just going to lead to more violence, you know.
On that as well, there were some of the scenes from that Thursday night protest when there were these clashes between protesters and guards, and it was pepper spray used. Protesters say that they were assaulted by guards. Drew Harris has said that guards were assaulted by protesters. A Garda car apparently was smashed up with an axe. And seeing some of these videos, and I saw like some people on the left were either ambivalent about it, or, you know, some people were kind of positive about it. Certainly you can be on the left and you can be frustrated by, you know, when these guys show up at libraries, and, you know, that whole campaign against libraries down south, like that again was driven by far right politics, and they're gonna like, you know, you like the people going in calling for those books to be banned, like they will have to, you know, own the fact that you've got far right politics, you know.
Yeah.
And it certainly can be on the left, and yeah, I can understand why it would be frustrating to see, like, these guys were escorted in by guards, and their protest was facilitated or enabled by guards. Then you can compare it to something we talked about last week, Martha Ní Riada, the president of the UCD Students' Union, who she was protesting a war criminal in Nancy Pelosi, and she was, you know, assaulted out of the room by a guard there, you know. So certainly, and there are so many examples of this, of, you know, left-wing protests being, you know, broken up by the guards, or guards, you know, guards assaulting left-wing activists and left-wing protesters. So I understand the kind of tendency or the inclination for some on the left to kind of go, well, why can't you do the same thing to these right-wing or far-right protests? But I've always kind of thought you don't solve this problem, or you don't beat these kind of politics with some level of policing.
Yeah, I think, like, I have to say, like, I felt quite uncomfortable watching on Twitter some of the comments when I think it was Fatima Gunning from Gript put up a video where she seemed to have been pepper sprayed in the face by guards. It seemed like that there was a lot of accounts, like, on the left, or a fair amount, like, that seemed to kind of take joy in what was going on. And I think that is a problem, like, where there's this kind of lack of consistency sometimes with a lot of people on the left, where I think it's difficult to be giving out about the scenes we saw at UCD and then kind of getting excited about what you see in Newtownmountkennedy. And, you know, I think if you're on the left and, you know, you want to talk about policing and stuff like that, I think you do have to be consistent. It can't be like, oh, fair play to the guards for baton charging those people because I don't like their politics, you know?
Yeah, and because apart from anything, all of those tactics will just be used against the left. Apart from anything, like, you know. And it's also, yeah, on just a very base level, if you're on the left, it's seeing an arm of the state like that enact that kind of violence. It's a bad thing. Like.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's hard to kind of because it was dark and stuff like that. It's if you're not there, it's kind of difficult to see what kicked everything off. But I mean, it certainly, you know, seemed like an overreaction to pepper spray someone in the face that didn't really seem to be causing any kind of or posing any threat. Like, kind of got the impression that there were that there's a lot more locals involved now than there were before the riot squad got involved. That I heard some people saying, oh, well, like, my son was down there and, like, he was baton charged, but, you know, he didn't do anything or whatever. So isn't there a theory like that? I think we were talking about it before, that there's no situation that can be made better by the presence of police or the guards. So I think, like, that is, like, that's a problem, like, for the left, basically.
It's also like the politics of the guards, where a number of guards are suspended and being investigated for running an extortion racket of delivery drivers. We're now supposed to believe, that the guards can be our anti-racist heroes.
Yeah, it's like that. This is the other thing which I think, you know, maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about, is that I would imagine, you know, based on certainly based kind of on like from experience of just, like, not experience of being there, but experience of kind of seeing how the guards operate, like, at, you know, we've seen how they operate, like, during when they're trying to evict people from abandoned buildings and stuff like that, and at left protests. I mean, I would say, and there's even been surveys as well about, you know, Garda attitudes to travellers, and I think there was one about their attitude to people of colour, things like that. So I would certainly say that a lot of guards share similar politics to a lot of these protesters.
Forces.
Yeah.
Some of these circles, you know, far right, further right, ethno-nationalist groups, they're, you know, relatively well organised, and I have seen that there's a relatively well drilled on who they go after, basically. And you'll see with public figures, elected officials, even, and look, we have experience of it ourselves, even with media, a lot of these guys, they don't go after the state, they don't go after people on the right. It's the left that they really don't like, you know. And they're relatively well disciplined as far as, you know, keeping their sights on, generally speaking, more left-wing targets, I suppose. And then this also it's had an impact. I think the impact has been overstated, but you know, Sinn Féin haven't been performing particularly well in polls. Other parties on the left, they've seen their support base divided, and that is the whole point of this, of, you know, right-wing or far-right or just racist politics. The first thing it aims to do is divide the left, divide actual working people. How do you think the left should respond? Like, what would a positive vision to, if we're saying that we can't police the far right out of Ireland, you know, how should the left respond?
I think, just from a very practical point of view, I think when they're confronted by people on the far right, when they're canvassing, like, they need to fucking give as good as they get. You know, they need to get up in their face, which we've seen. I've seen Paul Murphy do that. I've seen Thomas Gold.
Oh yeah,
can't pronounce his surname. Sinn Féin TD in Cork.
Yeah.
That was a while back. I think he told them to fuck off or something like that. I honestly, I think you need to not back down and, you know, stand your ground with them on a kind of a practical face-to-face level, you know. But in terms of politics, I think that's kind of I think that's a bigger battle, you know. What is Sinn Féin? How is Sinn Féin kind of supposed to manage or react when they're confronted by a lot of people in working class areas who are basically saying that they're fed up with them, and, you know, they're looking now at parties like the Irish Freedom Party or whatever they're called now. I think that's the bigger battle, but I think it's kind of hard to say now what the best approach would be until we see kind of if the far right are going to actually make any electoral gains at the local and European elections. I think after the June elections, I think we'll have a much better idea of what exactly the left is dealing with.
And it's just, for me, it's just about the allocation of resources, which is said, and that, you know, it's not about the state's immigration policy. It's about that there are resources in Ireland. I mean, I'm even reluctant, you know, Ireland is full, and I think it's I understand why they've done it, but, you know, Virgin Media had a documentary, Is Ireland Full? And talked about fucking Egypt, Paul Trevo and all that kind of stuff. And I'm reluctant to even just, you know, engage on that terrain, you know, because it's a maxim, and of course we'll just say no. Well, it's not. There is a problem with the allocation of resources, and it's just frustrating. Yeah, that, you know, all of these guys have reactionary anti-worker policies and anti-worker politics.
I think the problem though, is because you were asking the question from the point of view of the left. The problem is that the left have no control over the allocation of those resources. So, I mean, maybe one of the solutions is the left actually getting into power. Do you know what I mean? And having a shot at, you know, providing disadvantaged communities with resources. But at the moment, they can't do that. And I think the government is in a very good position where they do control the resources and they can see the damage that these protests in the far right are doing to parties of the left.
Now, one person, Porco Maskell, who is a great writer and journalist from Belfast, and we've worked with him on the Temple Street stories, and he tweeted over the weekend something along the lines of that. And again, like, it's, say whatever you want, but I mean, Porco Mescal is the guy who broke probably what the most significant medical or healthcare story that the country's seen in the last couple of years. So like, this is someone who's actually had an impact on healthcare policy in Ireland. He's just, he's not just standing on the sidelines, but he tweeted over the weekend saying that, like, Ireland isn't full, and if it wasn't for our history of colonialism, of poverty, of the immiseration of the people of Ireland, we wouldn't be having these conversations, and which brings us up to, we did another story about Temple Street last week. Do you want to talk us through some of the developments since we published?
Yeah, so like, it seems that certainly from the content of their letter that HICWA have, I would say, vindicated Padraig and our reporting on the Temple Street scandal, particularly in relation to the use of non-medical grade springs in operations on children with spinal issues such as spina bifida. I think we're going to see kind of a lot more movement now. I think there's a report, an external report being undertaken at the moment by an expert from the UK, whose name I can't remember. I would say that we will also have the medical council inquiry, if that's the right term, into Conor Green, who's the surgeon at the centre of this scandal. More recently then, we saw, as we broke through a tweet, the news that Alish Irman is being moved around, reassigned, as is always the case in Ireland historically. When someone hasn't been doing their job properly, they are moved to another parish.
This move came just after we published the story about, as you said, HICWA vindicated the reporting, and because there has been, it's funny when some of the other press in Ireland have taken up the story, you can see some of them have tried to suggest that the wrongdoing wasn't as serious as was being made out, whereas like HICWA have really, really straightforward the contents of their letter, and but it was after we had broken that story, that the news then broke that Alish Irman, who former CEO, has been reassigned to another part of the organisation, and it's something that we saw kind of as we broke the first story and as Porrick worked on it. There seemed to be a real aversion to any level of accountability within Children's Health Ireland, who would run Temple Street Hospital.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you go back to the CEO's performances at the Oireachtas committee, they're just, I mean, like, it certainly wasn't surprising for me, like similar kind of crack when the HSE appears before these committees. Like, it's just a complete, like, it's almost as if they live on a different planet to the rest of us, and downplaying everything, and just kind of no sort of willingness to accept even like a minimal amount of responsibility for what's happened, and just brushing off any sort of interrogation. I mean, it's kind of like it's typical, like, of these healthcare scandals where nobody like wants to take any sort of responsibility for what's gone down. And it's important to remember, like, that at least one child died.
Carter.
Died from seemingly as a result of an operation at Temple Street. You know, you're talking about children dying. You're talking about children whose spines are you know, deteriorating by the week, and there's been no resumption of the appropriate operations that they need. So not only is it a lack of accountability, it's a lack of any sort of a plan. And I think we saw in our latest story that some families still aren't receiving information or communication from CHI or Temple Street in relation to what exactly is going on.
Temple Street, didn't get in contact with at least two of the families to communicate to them what HICWA had informed them of, and they're just like, no.
It seems like they just don't give a fuck, like, about parents, or there just seems to be a lack of even basic compassion from senior management at CHI. And, you know, I would imagine, and certainly I've seen, like, from some of the tweets from the representative organisations or advocacy groups, that they're not going to be happy that the CEO is being removed by the board, but being appointed to another position where she'll have...
It's head of strategy.
Head of strategy, yeah. But she'll still... I think it relates to the National Paediatric Hospital, as far as I remember. So, like, she'll still be in a position of power and responsibility. So, like, there's no fucking accountability when it comes to this.
You know, we were talking about the hospital itself. When Porrick made freedom of information requests, it was then they instigated some level of internal investigations. And then equally, when it came time for us to publish Porrick's story, it was mid-September last year. And it was when Porrick asked them for comment on the story, then they announced another inquiry, and the HSE stepped in. And there was no kind of level of proactivity, I suppose. They had to be dragged kicking and screaming to even engage in that level of accountability. It was never proactive. It was always, oh fuck, what do they know? What do they know? What are they going to publish? What is Porrick going to ask next?
What can we get away with? You know, what can we continue to hide? What can we not continue to hide? And at no point in this process is there any consideration for the children that are waiting for operations, who are really living, in some cases, like, extremely difficult existences because they cannot get the services that they need. You
know, some of the stories that we've done down through the last few years, say, for example, you know, we've covered stuff about ministers' mileage claims, and it's fine. When you go and you ask for comment for a story like that, oftentimes there will be that kind of a dance almost, you know, where the person you're asking for comment will go, oh fuck, what do they know? What can I get away with? And we've experienced that quite frequently with different stories down through the years. It is just a part of how the whole journalistic process works. But to go back to what you were saying, you know, these weren't mileage claims. You know, these are matters of actual life and death for children, and you still have this. They're approaching it the same way a junior minister would approach a question about a mileage claim, going, "Oh God, like, what can we get away with here?" You know. Yeah, their priorities are, you know, to cover their arses, you know, to ensure that they don't have to take any personal responsibility for what's gone on. And, you know, at the very, very, very bottom of their priorities is a passing concern maybe for the children that are involved. And, you know, like we saw that, you know, we published the story on a Friday, and then on a Monday,
they start getting their arses into gear a little bit, and communicating the kind of bare minimum to the public and to the parents of these children. And as you said, like, it's just, they're not being proactive. They're just keeping things buried for as long as possible, and then when they're found out, they'll give a couple of crumbs, like, to kind of brush off questions from mainstream media.
And what do you think it tells us about healthcare in Ireland?
It's just like, it's the same kind of reaction or the same management style that you see in the HSE, and there's a scandal in the HSE. And, what does it tell us about healthcare in Ireland? I guess, like, the simple answer is that it's fucked. You know what I mean? Whether it be children waiting for spinal operations, whether it's waiting lists, whether it's people dying in A&E rooms in Limerick, like, it's that's what it is. That is our health service. It's fairly shit. As far as I can see, the staff that work in hospitals and in the health service in Ireland are doing the very best that they can. And it just seems to be impossible for anyone to get any sort of a handle on it, and I don't see it changing. Like,
for all its faults, and it's underfunded, but Britain establishing the NHS was a really powerful, significant thing. Really, outside of Cuba, would we say, certainly the NHS at its peak was, probably as good a health system as you could get, and the principles that underpinned it. Nye Bevan, who was the man most closely associated with the foundation of the NHS, he spoke, I think it was at a Labour conference, but he said something like, he considered himself a democratic socialist, I think, but he said something along the lines of, socialism is the language of priorities, and this is what we have decided is a priority. Whereas Ireland, nah, like, no government, no health minister has ever made it that priority. And it's still, so much of the health system is still run on the basis of extracting as much profit as possible.
No matter how much money is thrown at it, it doesn't seem to make any difference. So,
the third-party contractor,
yeah,
still doing well. That's it, yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Like, I mean, I've had an experience of it myself recently, where, I've been waiting for years to get an assessment for one of my kids. It was an autism assessment, and basically, it was outsourced to a company that's owned, I believe, by CPL. And suddenly, like, all the assessments came at once, like, speech and language, occupational therapy, and the ASD assessment. But, like, why is that the case? Like, it can't be, this, view that you'd see on the right, like, that privatizing everything is the answer. Those people that are doing the assessments existed before this company got the contract to do these assessments. So what is it? Like, why is it suddenly now that they're able to provide these assessments, but they couldn't recruit those staff themselves and offer the same services? So the answer seems to lie with the same with CHI. It's a management issue. The people that are running the health services are not competent. It's as simple as that.
It's ideological as well, I think.
Yeah, it's a mix of both. Like, it's
a commitment to privatization, just from not even on as far as efficacy goes, but just the actual politics of privatization. These people embrace that and agree with those politics.
Yeah, and I mean, if you see, look at Paul Reid, like, I would say a person who should have never been anywhere near that position, you know, wasn't qualified and didn't have the experience to take on a role like that, and was provided with a salary that is significantly higher than the head of the NHS was getting. You know, the head of the NHS is responsible for like 60 odd million people, you know, like it just seems to be, you know, a warped ideology, incompetence, you know, cronies being paid like insane salaries, and the result is a very shitty health service, you know.
Go for take of the week. A real favourite of yours, Francis Fitzgerald, writing in the Irish Independent. Well, first of all, I always find it, like, yeah, fine. Politicians can write op-eds in mainstream press. That's grand, but fuck me, they should have something to say, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and look, it makes sense, for example, that Micheál Martin over the last number of months, like, he's written an op-ed about Gaza in the Sunday Times. Didn't agree with what he wrote, but you understand why people would want to hear from the foreign minister about Gaza. Whereas the Irish Independent just gave Francis Fitzgerald a soapbox to talk about we have to be avoiding increasingly sinister culture wars.
Just before we start on Francis Fitzgerald's piece, the point that you've just made about you know, politicians being given an opportunity like to write these op-eds. I've seen recently, and I think I showed it to you, a situation where Joseph O'Madigan, who recently stepped down from her junior ministerial position, Fine Gael TD, had an interview, a big interview about you know, the divorce legislation that she brought in, and then was allowed for the same newspaper, I think it was the Independent, write the same fucking piece, but under her own name. Like, it was the same fucking shit, but just recycled and penned by her. And I just don't understand what the purpose of it was, you know.
Yeah, I struggle with the purpose of, you know, European elections coming up, and, you know, everyone very perturbed, very anxious about some of the candidates who are running in the European elections. Obviously, this is the Independent going, Francis Fitzgerald, she's the very serious, very sensible candidate. We should all get behind Francis. That, to me, was implicit in the Independent publishing this. It was only about like 600 words as well, but it was 600 words and nothing. And she was talking about how, you know, Fine Gael has to commit itself to law and order and social justice, and we have to commit to upholding the human dignity of everyone in the country. Apart from anything, I was thinking, I mean, a large part of her piece was talking about how we should be rejecting division, and I was kind of going, like, Fine Gael's raison d'etre is to be a party of division.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that struck me about her piece is that she seemed to be just writing the same thing over and over again in each paragraph, but just in a slightly different way. Yeah. And I'm not really, like, what I took away from her piece was that, you know, she seems to be, and this is like typical of Fine Gael, where the solution to, you know, social injustice and kind of like the issues with law and order that kind of come with that after that, was that you kind of first need to deal with crime in order to make you know, things more equal, instead of the other way around. Like, I mean, it was a very Fine Gael kind of way of looking things, where all these scumbags need in working class areas is a bit of Lugs Brannigan or whatever, and we'll make things fucking equal like that. Do you know what I mean? We'll deal with social issues by sending the guards in to fucking sort you out. Like it's a bizarre kind of outlook, and like a very archaic way of trying to kind of answer how do we deal with social issues, when the reality is like that you can prevent these security and crime issues by dealing first with the social issues. Like, pumping money into disadvantaged areas reduces the need for your, law and order politics. But Frances doesn't seem to get that. Like,
yeah, but she probably did get that. She was speaking very much to the id of Fine Gael. Those kind of types within the party. Like
Simon Harris, I think, said this week that we live in a country of laws.
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah, no one can deny. Guys, thanks so much for sticking with us. Episode 8 is in the books. We're gonna have a live event in Dublin next week. Sunday on the 12th of May in the Sugar Club. We'll be talking about who's going to be joining us. We've got some nice guests coming down to chat about the state of the left. So we hope to see you there, where we'll be doing a live episode of this podcast along with Red Wolf. Until then, we'll chat to you.